It's been 1 month since the Hamas attack on an Israeli settler venue marked the beginning of the latest round of hostilities between Palestinians and the Israeli military. Israel claims its death toll in the October 7th attack was at least 1,300, with thousands injured, according to Tel Aviv. Gazan government officials say more than 10,000 civilians, including 4,000 children, have been killed in Gaza by the bombing campaign that Israel has conducted since October 7th, and the bombing has intensified over the past weeks. Although a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire passed the UN General Assembly last week by a vote of 67% in favor to 7% opposed, with 31% abstaining, Israel and the US have ignored the call, and the bombing has not only continued, but spread to the south of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in the Ukraine war, the city of Donetsk in the Donbass Russian Republic was slammed by multiple missile attacks launched by Ukraine's military. That attack resulted in heavy damage to several critical civilian infrastructure sites. At least 20 people were killed in the attack, according to local officials, who said that figure may well grow. Meanwhile, Ukraine's foreign minister said that the Kiev government is bracing for the worst winter ever in the country's history. Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba said that he expects large-scale blackouts due to Russian missile strikes. Moscow began targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure last year in response to the bombing of the Crimean Bridge. Whether in Gaza or Donbass, the U.S. is finding itself more and more isolated. For more on that, we spoke with journalists Camila Escalante and Stephen Sefton. They spoke with us via Skype from Nicaragua.
Let's start with Camila. Just give us, I guess, to start with an overall view of where this collapse is evident.
Well, last night we heard from President Nicolas Maduro. He was speaking on his weekly program, which he does, a primetime show, and he talks about a lot of the news headlines. And he, said quite explicitly that the ideology, the extremist ideology that forms the basis of Zionism is even more dangerous than Nazism, the Nazi ideology. He said that this has the potential to not only it seeks to wipe out the Palestinian people through its genocide, through its ethnic cleansing, through its removal of land, its theft and displacement, but it also poses a threat because of the comments they made, the Israeli authorities made about using nuclear bombs and all these other things. It's going to affect other Arab peoples, other Muslim peoples, and he said it could even have an effect. They're going to come for Christians. They're going to come from Catholics, and it's going to affect all of us if they enter into a regional war. And, Evo Morales also had a similar interview where he similarly expressed those sorts of thoughts with Hispan TV, which just came out. That, of course, is Iran state media. We don't hear that in the mainstream media, but this represents what Latin America and a lot of the global South, people everywhere, are thinking right now about this situation. They're totally rejecting the mainstream narrative. And more than that, they're rejecting all of the claims that are coming out from our politicians, from the politicians in the North, particularly people, obviously, like Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, the EU leaders, and all of these other people who have been just stringing us along with all of their wars, their warmongering. And we're seeing the absolute failure of NATO in Ukraine against Russia there. And so people are really beginning to piece things together. What Maduro has said here really represents, it may not seem like it, but a large part of the population of the global South who are not going to sit around and listen to another speech about human rights and democracy, attacking small countries, attacking countries with small economies, when we're seeing the way that they actually operate. And they are gearing up for even, more war and more violence in that region of the world around Palestine. And it's very scary. And I think that people are finally waking up, despite the sea of propaganda that we've been submitted to.
It's funny. We have the same phenomenon right here in the United States and among perhaps the most propagandized people on the planet, with Donald Trump spending the day facing criminal charges in a courtroom when this comes out, with 6 other criminal cases pending against him, outpolling Joe Biden in almost every measure. in all of the key states except for one, the swing states so-called, on the economy, which is like the main issue, even when people aren't stressed, and they're stressed like they haven't been in decades. And also on the question of war and peace. Who do you think is going to be more likely to get you into a war, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Joe Biden. So, I mean, the same phenomenon you're describing in terms of people on the ground in Latin America rejecting the narrative from the West. Even the people in the United States are rejecting it.
Yeah, I think Camilla's right about the whole issue of in the majority world, Western countries, the United States and its allies have completely lost credibility in terms of their, any claim to moral authority, if they had any in the first place. But they used to go through the motions, and some people apparently were convinced. But I think that's over now. And the fallout from recent events is probably likely to include increased pressure for reform of the UN, especially the Security Council, obviously. And whether that pressure will result in concrete reform, who knows? But I know there is undoubtedly pressure, and the UN has demonstrated yet again that it's completely incapable of assisting to bringing about resolutions or reconciliations to these kinds of conflicts when the United States is determined, or its allies are determined, to impose their will. And associated with that, of course, is the increased authority of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China as arbiters and brokers, honest brokers, in international relations. And I think we're going to see that these two trends are going to continue: the decline in the credibility of the United States, the decline in people preparing to take the UN as an authoritative body if it doesn't reform, and the increasing role of countries like the Russian Federation and China in influencing international affairs. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a very important meeting not long ago between ASEAN and the Gulf states, the Organization of the Gulf States.
Yes.
They were talking about their interests, what are our interests, and there was no role in that meeting for the United States or their allies. And I think that's very significant and indicative of what Camilla was saying.
Just today at the United Nations, outside the Security Council, well, maybe it was yesterday, the press, things that they have outside. You had the representative from China, who China's chairing the Security Council this month, and a representative from the UAE, and they've been kind of spokespeople for the position to try to get a ceasefire and some sort of a settlement in and around Gaza, completely in opposition to the United States that's been trying to shut down any discussion of anything other than opening the gates for a minute, letting a couple sandwiches in, and then back to bombing. And I've seen like a more and more assertive role with some of the Gulf state players and China, Russia, even India in formulating some counterweight to the U.S. and European, Megillah.
Yeah, and the other example that I wanted to give of why people are completely the West has completely lost legitimacy and people are outraged is because of that gaffe, that Freudian slip made by Justin Trudeau when he almost called for a ceasefire by accident when he was speaking to the press following his meeting with Joe Biden. He began to say all sorts of gibberish to cover up what he was saying because the instruction has been for a so-called humanitarian pause. But the White House will not allow Canada, which doesn't even have its own sovereign government, apparently, neither its own independent foreign policy, cannot go and make its own claims, its own demands, and decide which route it wants to go on this issue without authorization from Washington. And that has been made perfectly clear.
It's pretty ugly, for sure. All right, you guys, we appreciate your time and effort, and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of days. And thanks for pinch hitting today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, Don.
Thank you.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.